Hi, I'm Alan Fryer, and this is another Northumberland History Snapshot. The Edlingham Witch. I found this interesting and entertaining tale in the Monthly Chronicle of North Country Lore and Legend 1888 of a witch trial in Edlingham near Alnwick. It could almost be said to be quite an amusing tale, but it could have ended in tragedy. In the early 17th century, there was something approaching widespread hysteria that malevolent satanic witches were operating as an organised threat to Christendom. In 1649, 27 women were hanged on Newcastle Town Moor as witches. Their guilt was based on the flimsiest evidence by an unscrupulous witch finder. There were many recorded similar and equally tragic events around the country. If you are old, ugly, crone-like with snaggled teeth and hairy lips, you would no doubt be under suspicion. This is what happened to Margaret Stothard, although to be fair, I wouldn't want to be left alone with her judging by these testimonies. A case of witchcraft occurred in the neighbourhood of Alnwick in 1682-3. The alleged witch was a poor old woman named Margaret Stothard, who lived at the village of Edlingham. The depositions, which have happily for the curious in such matters been preserved, are given at length in Mackenzie's History of Northumberland. They were taken on the 22nd day of January in the above year before Henry Ogle of Edlingham, one of His Majesty's Justices of the Peace for Northumberland, whose father, John Ogle, was High Sheriff of the county in 1655, and who himself died so late as 1711, the 9th year of Queen Anne. John Mills of Edlingham Castle, yeoman, confessed before this worthy magistrate, and solemnly swore that, about the spring time of the year 3 years bygone, or thereby, on a Sabbath day at night, being lying in his bed, but not having slept any, he did hear a great blast of wind, as he thought, go by his window, and immediately followed there was something fell with a great weight upon his heart, and gave a great cry like a cat, and then after another in the same manner, and just as those was ended there appeared a light at his bed foot, and he did in the some light see Margaret Stothard, or her vision to the best of his knowledge. So the power of his speech being taken away from him at the time, and as soon as ever he recovered strength to speak, he cried out, "The witch, the witch!" So his family asking what was the matter with him, informant assured his wife and the rest of his family that the witch, Margaret Stothard, had been upon him. So the said informant was in such a condition that they were forced to hold him, and they could not get him holden, but he was forced to come and fetch a brother of his to help them. And several times this informant hath had this trouble, and always before it came he would hear the blast of wind, as aforesaid, come by his window, that he would have been such a fright that the very hairs of his head would stand upwards, till such times that he got up and lighted a candle and taken his Bible and read, which would something qualify his fears. Some time about summer gone a year, that is a year and a half before the information was laid, John Mills had been away at his landlord's paying his rent, and when he was coming down the street and hard by Margaret Stothard's door, a flash of fire came over before him, and, as he thought, went to her doors. He was not at all afraid for the fire, he said, until his horse took to a stand, and would neither go backwards nor forwards. Then he began to be afraid, and his hair stood upward on his head. But he had the presence of mind left to cry out, "O Lord, deliver me for thy mercy's sake, and for thy own name's sake." Then the horse went forward, and he got home, but he continued in great pain all that night, so that he was forced to send for his brother and other neighbours to stay with him till the next morning. William Collingwood of Edlingham disposed that, about 8 or 9 years before, to the best of his knowledge, one Jane Carr of Leamington had some discourse with him about Margaret Stothard, when that good woman, with weeping tears, told him how Margaret had charmed a child of hers that was unwell. One day, according to her statement, a woman came in and said 3 times over, "Here's a fine child," And no sooner had this woman gone away than the child took a shrieking and crying that it was almost scalded to death. But Margaret Stoddart, chancing to be in the town in the meantime, and being a reputed charmer for such sudden distempers, Jane called her in to see the child, telling her that she believed it had received wrong. Margaret took her child in her arms, and what she said to it the mother knew not, but she put to her mouth the child's mouth, and made such chirping and sucking that it seemed as if she had sucked the child's heart out, which frightened poor Jane very much. Then Margaret gave the child back to its mother, and said she would warrant it would be well enough. So saying, she went forth and sat down on a stone in the entry of the house, and began to rave herself and rift and gaunt in such an odd manner that she almost frightened the mother of the said child out of her wits. And when she rose up and went away, a little calf that was tied in a band in another room went perfectly mad, so that they saw nothing for it but to be put to death. The poor beast was consequently killed, and the conclusion was Margaret Stoddart, by her charming or witchcraft, had taken the distemper out of the child and laid it upon the calf. Jacob Mills of Edlingham Castle told another cock and bull story of the same kind. Only 2 days before the depositions were taken, one Alexander Nicol of Larbottle and his wife told him he averred that they had heard a child died about 8 years previously, and that before it took ill, Margaret Stoddart had come into their house and asked for alms of the good wife, who, being afraid of her by the ill fame she bore in the country that she was a witch, either refused to give her anything, or said she had nothing to give her. Whereupon Margaret went away, of course very much dissatisfied. As soon as she had gone, one of the children said to her mother, "Did you not see what that woman did to you when she went away?" "No," answered Mrs. Nicol. "She waved at you a white thing 3 times, replied the child. Whereat the mother rejoined, "I do not care for her, whatever she does, for I hope the Lord will protect me from any such as she is." But next morning, before day, the child grew unwell, and continued all that day very ill, still crying out, "The woman that waved that white thing at you is above me, pressing of me, and like to break my back and press out my heart." And so the child continued, still crying out in that manner, until next morning, again about cockcrow, when it died. The parents verily believed that Margaret Stoddart was the death of it. The father, Alexander Nicol, who was present before the justice, disposed to the same effect, adding further that seeing the child in so sad a condition, he went up to Cartington to my Lady Widrington and told her the case, whereupon the lady answered that she could not understand any distemper the child had by the circumstances they told her, unless it was bewitched. And Lady Widrington, being a person of quality, and moreover a good friend of the poor, her opinion had considerable weight. Isabel Mayne of Shorten, spinster, was the last informant that day against the reputed witch. She said she had been in the service of one Jacob Pearson of Titlington about 3 or 4 years before, thereabouts, to the best of her knowledge, and had charge of that gentleman's house in Milkness. The Milkness somehow went wrong, so that she could not get any cheese made from it, as she used to do formerly, and she really believed it had been wronged by some witch or other. So, accidentally meeting with a woman that lived at Edlingham, she desired her that she would speak to her neighbour, Margaret Stoddart, whom she had often heard tell of as a reputed charmer, and tell her in what condition their milk was. This the woman did, when Stoddart told her she would warrant to make their milk well enough again, and about 8 days afterward the charmer came to Titlington and asked the housekeeper how her or her master's milk now was. The reply was to the effect that it was pretty well now. Isabel then asked Margaret why the milk had come to be in such a bad condition, and she was told that it had been forspoken, and that some ill eyes had looked on it. When further asked why it was that the master's cows sweat so when they stood in the byre, her answer was that, to prevent this, she ought to take salt and water and rub their backs. Moreover, Margaret Stoddart said, as touching the milk, always when you go to milk your cows, put a little salt in your pail or skeal. But as Isabel Mayne demurred to doing that, the witch gave her a piece of round tree wood, and bid her take that always along with her when she went to the cows, which would answer the purpose. Thinking there was no need for any such thing, however, the milk being then in very good condition as usually before, the piece of wood was laid aside. Yet from that day forward both butter and cheese could be got from the milk, which had not been possible before. When offered a penny as charmers' dues in payment for so mending or charming of the said milk, Margaret Stoddart would not accept anything. No, a little of anything will serve me. So Jacob Pearson, on being told what she said, gave his housekeeper a fleece of wool to give to the woman, and the canny housekeeper, by her own account, gave a little more to it. After that, they always had their milk in very good order. Before finally leaving, Margaret Stoddart said to Isabel Mayne, "If you judge that any person hath wronged your milk, take your cow's tie and ask the milk again, for God's sake." But Isabel, who seemed to have been a very devout person, replied that she would never do that, if their milk should never be right any more, and it would seem that the occasion for it never arose. The result of this tragic comic affair cannot now be ascertained. Whether Margaret Stoddart was permitted to die in her bed or in a ditch, nobody can tell. It does not appear, at any rate, that she either suffered death by the law or was hunted to death by her superstitious neighbours.